You buy a pair of socks, that's 2 socks. You buy a pair of Bombas socks, that's 4 socks. Because one purchased is one donated. Socks are the #1 most requested clothing item in homeless shelters. So when you buy a pair of super comfortable Bombas socks, you're also donating a pair. Bombas customers have powered over 150 million donations. So Bombas would like to thank you 150 million times. But we only have like 30 seconds. Go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code Wondery for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code Wondery at checkout.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my weekly co-host, Brett.
Hello, Alice. I don't know about that descriptor. I mean, it's true. But
We're on weeks types of recap for the Karen Reed trial, not daily.
Okay.
You see?
Okay.
You see what I did there?
I see. It's not weak, like not strong.
No, my weekly,
time
as
thing.
in
Okay.
every week we have an episode. Oh, I wasn't looking
True.
to put you down.
Well,
Not
we only
today.
do Karen Reed every 2 weeks because that's the most we can do.
My bi-weekly co-host. I guess I
Oh,
could have said
man.
my semi-week co-host.
It's a problem with semi-weekly. What does that even mean? Who knows?
Who knows?
Does it mean
Half a week or twice a
yeah,
week?
or every other week? It's just
Who knows?
it's strange.
Who knows?
English.
English.
So, yeah, we're back to talk about Karen Reed. And I know this is everybody's favorite case. And hey, it's been fascinating.
Look.
We've been streaming the trial. People have been watching every day. It's been more fun in some ways this time than last time.
There's more camaraderie, shall we say, because we can have the chat and all kind of marvel, shall we say, at the fact that a hit and run is going on week 6. in
And
trial.
I'll say this, a couple things, just observations about this case. I mean, number one, I think whether you think Karen Reed's innocent, guilty, a hero, a devil, the prosecution's case has been much better this time than it was last time. Now, I know there are Karen Reed people who disagree with that just because they have to. They disagree with everything. But I don't really know how anyone could say that the prosecution hasn't done a better job focusing their case, presenting their evidence, getting all the evidence they needed this time around than last time. But we're still going into week 6 and the prosecution's still going. And what's been interesting about it, last time the defense in their cross-examination was lengthy for a lot of people. But this time it seems like it is so much more in depth. And I don't know if that's because they anticipated there are going to be fewer witnesses, so they're not going to have the opportunity to develop their story, which is probably what it was. And so they're just really spending a lot more time with these witnesses. And you're seeing multiple witnesses go on for just days on end. Whereas before, there were only a couple witnesses like that. You know, your Michael Proctors, your Jen McCabe's, and they were long crosses. But this time it just feels like even the most innocuous witness is on the stand for just forever. And you're seeing that when we do the coverage of these weeks. I mean, we do 2 weeks at a time, and there aren't that many witnesses. And it's kind of interesting to see that difference.
Yeah, the number of witnesses is crawling. And look, we've always been taught this as prosecutors. No matter how long the trial is, the jury typically blames the prosecution. Like, even
true.
if it's the cross-examination that's taking long, even if the prosecution's case in chief is relatively short and then it's the defense's case that's really long, generally, like, what we're taught is you need to make sure you're getting in and getting out and being concise and being very specific about what you're bringing into the trial, because if they have to stay there towards a holiday, late, whatever, weeks on end, they're always going to generally blame the prosecution because the burden is on the prosecution and because they typically view, well, it's the prosecution who's bringing the charges. So I'm here because of the prosecution. And so that is a tactic sometimes with the defense is we're not going to be dinged for going long. It's all going to come back on the prosecution. And you can imagine, what are you thinking right now? I kind of made a joke at the beginning. A hit and run. How is it going on week 6? Well, some jurors, if they forget everything, may just go on that. If it were so simple, prosecution, why are we still here on week 6? It must be because there's reasonable doubt. It must be because the defense has a point. It must be because X, Y, and Z. If it were so simple, couldn't you just explain it to me in a week? That is a very real concern in any type of case, but that may be what the defense is going for here. And I've seen like titterings online where people say something to that effect from people who have not watched the trial at all. And so that is a very real environment that's going on around the trial as well.
Now, I'll say this case may be the exception that proves the rule, because I don't know how you could listen to Alessi in his cross-examinations and blame the prosecution, because he just goes on and on. And I will say this, one of the rules of cross-examination that this defense team just breaks with abandon. And never been a defense attorney in this kind of setting, so what do I know? But typically on cross-examination, you're sort of taught cross-examination is most effective when you really have the points you want to hit, and you hit those points and you really emphasize those points for the jury, so that that's what the jury remembers from the entire examination of the witness. They don't remember the direct. What they remember are the three things you pointed out that are massive weaknesses, that how is the prosecution going to answer that question? You get in, you ask those questions, and you get out. And the defense team does not do that. And I will say there have been times where the defense has made points that I thought might be pretty good or pretty effective, but then 5 hours later, we're still cross-examining, and it's like, how much is the jury, and you never know, right? I mean, you can't know, but how much is the jury, are they identifying the really important points the defense is making, or are they also getting lost in the words? And we won't know that. It's like everything else. If they win, if she's acquitted, well, it was brilliant, right? And we just won't know that till the end. But there have been very few witnesses where they have been brief. We'll talk about one of them in this recap. But with that, let's go ahead and get in. We did have a couple people who emailed about the Google search. We talked about that in the last episode, but we went over it pretty quickly because this is not an in-depth review. If you want an in-depth review of the Karen Reed case, you can listen to what we talked about last time, our 10 episodes or whatever on the last trial. But I did feel like this is important. So since we sort of just skimmed over Ian Whiffen, just give you sort of an idea to really nail this down, because I think if you understand the data, you understand how whatever happened in this case, the Google search has been completely debunked. So let's just talk about it. So Jim McCabe, like most of us, had multiple tabs open on her phone. And at around 2:20 in the morning that John was found, several of those tabs showed activity. I do want to give a hat tip to Reddit user Mabe8, who broke this down, but it's all in Whiffen's testimony. So if you go back and listen to Whiffen's testimony, he lays all this out. But that person did a really good job of sort of putting it in a graph, and so I figured they needed a shout out for that. Anyway, so here's basically how this went down. So at around 2:27 and 28 seconds, Safari is opened on Jen McCabe's phone. 1 second later, tab 1, which is for Hakamak Sports, is closed. So basically, she's opening up her phone, she's going to Safari, and she's starting to close tabs. So tab 2 is closed 1 second later. Tab 3, now this is the same tab that was used to play It's Raining Men earlier in the night. It is then closed 6 seconds after that. Tab 4 is closed next. So finally, tab 5 comes up, and it has Ozone Basketball on it. So basically, she's got her Safari open, she's closing tabs, she gets to Ozone Basketball. It's now 2:27 and 40 seconds. And at this point, she starts looking at her daughter's sporting schedules, right? So her daughter, I think, was a hockey player or something. And so she's basically looking at this. Now, in a world where we don't have a murder here and we don't have a conspiracy, what is Jen doing right before she goes to bed? She's checking to make sure she's got what her daughter's going to be doing in the future in her mind before she goes to bed. I'm sure a lot of us do this. I often look at my calendar for the next day. Do I have a hearing the next day? Do I have something I have to do? Do I need to be somewhere in the morning? She's essentially doing that. Following this search, so after she looks up her daughter's sporting events, the Safari is minimized and nothing else happens. And then at 6:23, Safari is reopened. And when it's opened, it's on this tab that she had used to look for her daughter's sporting events. Shortly thereafter, a file is created in the phone for how long to digest food. Essentially what is happening is she, at 6:23, when this file is created, she's doing a search. And the phone is auto-completing, as it often does. And this was the first auto-completion, but that's not what she's looking for. At 6:23 and 51 seconds, the search "hose long to die in the cold" is made, and this time matches up exactly with her testimony, which is that she did this shortly after John was found at the behest of Karen Reed. Now, the entire reason that this ever became an issue was because when the defense expert looked at this, they saw the time that this tab was accessed at 2:27 in the morning the night before, not the time the search was made. What's interesting about this is the people who do this, Celebrite, actually change the way their reports are done to make sure that this mistake is not made in the future. So they've actually corrected this so that if you did this review right now to looking at Jim McCabe's phone, you would never make this mistake because you would see what the technology is actually telling you. So that's what Whiffen testified to. And that's why we've said several times that this whole Google search thing is really just completely debunked. It didn't happen. It didn't happen at 2:27. It happened the next morning. She just happened to be using a browser that was open at 2:28.
Yeah, when it's said like that, it seems incredibly clear, especially the minimizing and then silence for 4 hours before it's reopened. That's certainly how I use my tabs. And the way it was explained seems incredibly clear. I don't think there's any way around basically what the forensic electronics show you there. Okay, Yuri is back on the stand. So the defense set up the snowplow driver testimony that will come later with the mirrored Sallyport footage. And they also did some more Proctor texts, which we've already talked about. Proctor's tests. They are not good, right? They do not look good for Proctor. It's not professional. And you can understand why the defense will get all up in a tizzy about these texts. They also show a video of Brian Higgins showing up at the Canton Police Department just like he said he did. Now, on redirect, we watch a video of the SUV arriving at the station at 5:36 p.m. Now, this is important because remember, CERT was already on the scene at Fairview collecting evidence. And they find the first item in the snow at 5:45 p.m. But neither Yuri nor Proctor went to Fairview during this period. So if the conspiracy is they had planted some of the broken shards from the SUV, they had to have had the SUV in their possession, but the SUV was in their possession, and then the first shard was found in under 10 minutes all the way at Fairview, but no one from where the SUV was located had gone over to the crime scene to litter shards of taillight around.
I don't know how you get around this. Proctor, doesn't matter. He can be the second coming of Hitler. He can be the worst person in the world, but he couldn't have done it. It's kind of like when you have a really good, there's a murder and it has all the indicia of a killer and you're like, it's that guy. And then you realize, oh, actually, no, he's in prison 3 states away. So I guess he couldn't have done it. Right. And it's the same thing here. You got the situation where during the recross and the cross, we're looking at the mirrored Sallyport video and where is Michael Proctor? Oh, he's over there by the taillight. Maybe that's the moment where he's getting the shards. But unfortunately, CERT's already on the scene finding stuff under the snow. So how does this work? Like, you have to just kind of turn off your brain for this to work. Like, you can't actually look at the times that they're there doing stuff and make the connection. It just doesn't work because CERT's on scene and they're finding stuff. And there's no proof that Proctor or Yuri ever even went down there that day. So the fact, and you can say, well, yeah, but the next day they found more shards.
And that's the ridiculous part, right? When people are like, oh, they found them later. So they found real shards and then they felt the need to plant more shards? Why? They already had the shards. Why would you plant more?
Shard's enough.
That's really risky. You don't need more. And further, you not only had to plant additional shards when you already found shards, but you had to bury them so that when the snow melted, you'd be able to see them in the first instance without having it appear that you dug anything when it hadn't snowed more. This is where the suspension of belief, but also like fixating on one part of what could be the conspiracy without taking it into context matters, right? Okay, why? Seriously, why would you want to plant them later? It doesn't matter. Forget it. The other shards don't matter. The fact that they find shards that day as it's starting to get dark in the blizzard, how did it get there? When the SUV is miles away.
Your conspiracy have to just get bigger and bigger, right? Like, well, somehow when they were at Karen's parents' house, even though there's video. They were gathering the shards then, and maybe they gave it to somebody else who went to Fairview and somehow buried them under the snow without leaving any marks, or maybe the whole CERT team's in on it. And in fact, they watched them bury it there so they could find it and just lied about there not being any footprints and no marks in the snow. But your conspiracy, and this is what we said from the very beginning, and people want to deny this. People want to say, oh, no, you're acting like it has to be this massive conspiracy. It doesn't. It just has to be a couple people. No, for this to work, the number of people who must be involved just grows with every fact that comes out. There are new people who now must be not only knowing about the conspiracy, but taking active steps to facilitate it at this early hour.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discount for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it. So your dollar goes a long way.
Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
And that's not the only thing, right? So Yuri also notes that John's pants have grass stains on the back. Why is this significant? Well, remember the snow started falling sometime after the hit of Karen's car. And so there was still grass on the ground to hit. Snow started piling up pretty soon after. And so he had to have been there when there was still grass to fall on rather than placed there after the fact. And also, if that's not enough for you, that he was on the ground before it started snowing, his hat was also found at ground level, frozen to the ground. So he'd been there for some time. He wasn't placed on top of the snow. He was there as it started to snow around him.
So that's Monday's testimony. It's pretty bad for Karen. Tuesday, it's going to be even worse because John's niece and adopted daughter is going to testify. But wouldn't you know it, Tuesday comes and Karen, she just isn't feeling well. Like she has the Russian flu. Just can't get out of bed. She's just wiped out. So there's no trial. We have to take Tuesday off. And, I'm not going to say that it's never happened that trial's been canceled because the defendant wasn't, quote unquote, feeling well. But I feel like you typically need a little bit more proof about it than just, she didn't want to come today. She was tired. It's been a rough time. So anyway, we don't have trial on Tuesday. So no trial on Tuesday. So the jurors get to have their time on this trial extended even more. So on Wednesday, we start with some clips. The audio is bad on these, so I'm not going to play them. But in short, you have Karen saying that there was nothing wrong with their relationship. It's perfect in the first clip. And then another, she says that if John knew about the text with Brian Higgins, he probably wouldn't have reacted all that strongly because, he wasn't really into this relationship. So these two things, number one, it just shows sort of Karen's schizophrenia about what the actual circumstances of their relationship was, probably confirms that John was on the way out of this relationship, and also defeats this notion that Karen's own defense argument that it was these texts somehow that created the fire that led to this massive brawl in the house that night and ended with John being dead. And she's like, you wouldn't even cared. So typical, the defense is setting up some sort of argument and Karen comes in behind and helpfully just knocks the whole thing down. Okay, so at this point, after we play these clips, John's niece, who's his adopted daughter, I often call her his daughter because, he has been her father. He raised her. Yeah, these kids have been through unimaginable tragedy. Their mother died, and then their father died, and then John comes in, and he's this single parent of these two kids, and then Karen Reed kills him, and now they've lost another father, and now they're having to go through the second trial about this. So she comes in, and as I've always said, there are people out there who want to paint Carrie Roberts, who's a lifelong friend of John. Everybody gets slandered in this case, so they slander her. She's a liar. She's lying. Karen didn't say anything like John's dead. That's absurd. She's just making that up to frame Karen. Well, his daughter comes in, and honestly, of all the things that make me dislike Karen Reed, how she treated John's daughter that morning just is the icing on the cake of her awfulness. So she testifies. She says they were fighting a lot, that John wanted the relationship to be over. The morning of his death, Karen comes busting into her room at around 4:30 in the morning, saying that something had happened to John. She said, could I have done something? Was he hit by a plow? Maybe I hit him. This is her testimony. So I guess, you know, you can add her to Carrie Roberts, Jen McCabe, Katie McLaughlin, firefighter Nettle, and everybody else in the world, including Karen Reed, who says she said this thing about whether she hit him or not. She testifies to the same thing. So if you think Carrie is lying, well, then I guess his daughter is lying too. This obviously wasn't broadcast. You have to rely on the journalist in the room because she at the time was a minor and she still, I think, is only 17. So at this point, they start making phone calls. They call Carrie Roberts, just like Carrie Roberts says. They call Jen McCabe, who was her basketball coach. And she said Jen was level-headed. You know, Karen's running around like a mad person. Jen is very level-headed. She's very calming. And this develops and they figure out that something terrible had happened to John. She said Karen never checked on her. She said she never comforted her after they learned that John was dead. Instead, Karen said, I am living a nightmare because, of course, it's all about Karen and will always be about Karen.
I mean,
so after
must be so difficult. Like, it's one of those ridiculous things, right? Like, you're living a nightmare. Like, I just lost a third parent, right? I mean, that talk about a nightmare that she's truly living. But Karen, I mean, multiple things. She's living a nightmare because what if she gets caught? What if she has to actually answer to the fact that she caused all of this? That's a different type of nightmare, but she's causing the nightmare for so many people, including John's daughter, who's testifying now.
So she testifies, and then after this, we have some testimony from an officer who photographed the SUV. We had a few of these sort of very short directs for officers who just did various things, that chain of custody for the evidence and such. And we get testimony after him from Evan Brent, who helped search on February 3rd, 2022. So this is a few days later after the nor'easter. By this point, it had rained some. It was warming up. Snow was starting to melt. And at this point, they began to find even more of these taillight shards. Though even now, they're finding them still under about a foot of snow. So they're still having to dig through the snow. There's just a lot less of it. The conditions are much better. And they're finding more of the same taillight shards that were found by CERT that first day.
Again, under a foot of snow. Somehow, you know, days later, that's how much snow there is. They were able to bury, this is the conspiracy, they were able to bury it so far underneath that it's under a foot of snow. No one could tell that it had been shoveled down to get to it. And they're still finding it days later. Now we have the MSP crime lab forensic scientist, Maureen Harnett. Now, she noted scratches on the back right of the SUV. She also said that there were several glass shards lying on the back bumper. Now, there was no blood underneath the vehicle, and she did find a hair on the right side paneling of the bumper. Now, this hair that we've heard a lot about, from different angles of photography, the hair looks like it's facing different directions. And so the defense suggests that someone moved the hair between pictures. I don't know how this helps the defense, because the problem is there is a hair on the bumper, not which direction it's going. I don't know if you've seen a hair. I have a lot of it. Hair is a very, very thin strand, and if part of it is stuck and the other part is in the wind, might it blow with the wind? Yes, indeed it would. But again, they're focusing on the wrong thing, because why would someone want to reposition a hair? You'd think that they'd want to either stick more hairs on, not move it around, because the existence of a hair is the problem, not which direction it's facing. And again, Brett, I don't know. Do you know why someone may want to make sure that the hair gets its best side for the photograph?
You know, I'm endlessly fascinated by this conspiracy theory and the things that you have to believe for it to be true. And so I guess what the defense wants you to believe is that Michael Proctor, with his tweezers and a single hair of John's, is like placing it on the bumper and then taking a picture of it. He's like, oh, you know, I don't, you can't see it too well, so I'm going to move it a little bit and then take another picture. Oh, yeah, I like that one. And it's like, you know, you guys have pointed out 15 different times that there was a bag with some red Solo cups with blood in it. Like, if you were going to frame somebody, if you're going to try and prove that somebody backed into somebody and, you're corrupt enough, you're going to do that, and you got a cup of blood over here, might you just take some of the blood and sprinkle it on the bumper? I mean, throw some in the undercarriage? Or would you be like, no, I'm going to get one hair from the victim and place it ever so gently on the bumper. That's how I'm going to prove it. Forget this blood. That's how I'm going to do it. Like, where do you get this? Like, in what world does any of this make sense? Like, it only makes sense if you're looking backwards and you're trying to explain away the evidence that shows your person is guilty. That's the only way it makes sense.
Trying to not go with Occam's razor.
Yeah, it's you just have to generate this stuff to explain away all the evidence against your client and ignore reality and what would actually happen in the circumstance. It's the only way this makes sense, is this backward looking tunnel vision. But I guess that's what they want the jury to believe.
And here's the other thing. So the Maureen Harnett says that there's dirt and other debris found on John's jeans. This is consistent against with Yuri saying that there were grass stains on the back of his pants. Again, consistent with hitting the ground or being on the ground before there was snow, when there was dirt and debris. I don't know, around the 12:30 a.m. hour when he was getting out of the car, not being dragged out in the snow when it was already, feet deep during a cover-up. Next, Dr. Scordy Bello testifies. She could not determine the manner of death. And what this means is you can't specifically say if it's something like suicide or homicide, natural causes, etc. But Dr. Bello notes that John has rib fractures, likely, honestly, from the resuscitation efforts, because it's very intense. This is only why you do it for life-saving purposes. You press very hard on the chest, and he was not in great condition, so they were doing a lot of resuscitation. So he had rib fractures. He also had bruises on his right hand. But that's from IV attempts when they were trying to get an IV started once the ambulance had gotten there. Now, he also has abrasions on his right knee and right arm. He has a significant laceration on the back of his skull. Now, this is consistent with falling backwards and striking a hard surface. Dr. Bello also notes that John had severe hyperthermia with his body temperature 18 degrees below average, and he was hemorrhaging in the pancreas and in the stomach lining. Now, Scordy Bello sees no evidence of an impact site on John's body, but agrees that his injuries would be consistent with a vehicle clipping him in reverse. So, this is really interesting because people want to seize on the fact that there's no impact site, and they think of like a car accident having an impact site, like a baseball bat or something. The thing is, when you're standing upright, you have a lot of surface area, right? And a car also has a lot of surface area. That's not exactly like getting hit with a bat, but rather like wall hitting wall, right? Except one wall is going to lose, and that's the human, because a human is much less, sturdy than a car. And so though there's not an impact site where you can say, oh, you were, hit with a baseball bat, or I don't know, a German Shepherd that attacked you, but this is what it would look like if you were hit with a car in reverse. And with the back of the skull laceration, I think is really important. It's clearly been hit by the back of the ground, say.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with straw man arguments. If you're not, it's basically the entire defense and everyone on Twitter who supports Karen Reed. Because the argument you will hear again and 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 again is that Dr. Scordy Bello and the guys from ARCA, they say there's no evidence that John was hit by a car. And what they mean is there's no evidence, that she backed directly into him and ran him over, or that she hit him in the front of her car and, he went flying over the hood. That's true. If that was the prosecution's theory, if that was what people said happened, is that she ran him down with her car and, hit him in the chest and killed him, that would be demonstrably false. Fortunately, that is not the argument that the prosecution's making. And if you want to tackle this case, if you want to defend Karen Reed, you have to defend the actual argument being made against your client, your favorite murderer, whatever. You have to tackle that, not the made-up argument that you can defeat. That's straw manning. You built up your straw man and you lit it on fire and you said, oh, look at how well it burns, right? But you didn't actually prove anything. All you proved is that you don't care about the truth. You're just making stuff up so that you can continue to live in a fantasy land. That's what you're doing. You need to be able to show that John's injuries are not consistent with being clipped by her car, spun around or whatever, and falling backwards and hitting his head on the ground. Because that's the theory of how he died. Not that she ran over him. That is not the theory. And I have yet to see anyone address that. And despite the fact that everyone will say, well, Dr. Scortibello testified he wasn't hit by a car. That is not what she said. It's not what she said. And it doesn't matter how many times you say it. It's not what she said. So this is going to continue to be something the prosecution's going to build on. They're going to have an accident reconstructionist who's going to lay out exactly how this happened. And presumably at that point, we'll also have many more straw men that are developed in this case. But I think what we can say for certain, Dr. Scortibello is not a great witness for the prosecution. My recollection is the last trial, the prosecution ended with her, which I think we thought was terrible. Like, I could be making that up, but I have a recollection of her being either the last witness for the prosecution or very close to the end. And
it was
like,
one
wow.
of the last one. I think it was the second to last one or something, because it kind of ended with like, no, he wasn't hit by a car or something. Like, it was like, it was not great testimony. And it was kind of a, and then
kind of ended with a sputter.
Ended with a sputter, exactly.
And I think we said you need to bury her in the middle, which is what they're doing. So, I mean, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back, but I would just say this trial is going much more like how we said it should go than how it went in the first trial. So maybe I'm biased about this being a better presentation. Okay, so after this testimony, we have a little bit of fireworks in the courtroom because the defense moves to exclude a new report, which, based on the report of defense expert Matthew DeSorgra, indicates that the Lexus clock was behind the Apple clock. This clock thing can be a little confusing, but basically, remember what we've talked about several times. When Karen Reed is putting her car into reverse, when you have this impact moment, when John's Apple Watch stops recording steps. And we've said, if the clocks aren't the same, then it could be off a little bit. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, if I look at the clock on my cell phone, the clock on my computer, the bell tower outside, the clock downstairs, they're all off. Not by a ton, but they're all off just a little bit. Usually my cell phone is the most accurate, and I think that's probably true of most people. Anyways, so basically the prosecution gets this defense report. They see this, they give it to their expert. Their expert says, hey, these two clocks are off. And if we synchronize the two clocks, what happens? Well, then, if you synchronize these two clocks, the Lexus clock and the Apple clock, suddenly the trigger event and alleged impact of 12/31/38 lines up almost perfectly within seconds of John's phone registering his final steps and the final movement before the next day. So this is like a blockbuster in a lot of ways, because before people were like, oh, 30 seconds later, there's some steps. How is that possible? And we said, I think the prosecution said, well, he wasn't unconscious immediately. Maybe he moved around. Maybe it's the phone registering sort of false information. But it's actually even simpler than that. Once you synchronize the clocks, you don't have this problem. People on the defense side wanted to say the prosecution was changing their theory. They're not changing their theory. It's the exact same theory. They're just lining up these two clocks to show exactly when this happened. So the defense wants to keep this out. Their argument is this is a late report. We should have had this report before trial. Therefore, it should be kept out. The problem is, number one, this is the way it actually works in the real world. I realize your various YouTubers and everybody else is telling you this is like unusual. It's not, because you have reports coming in from experts. Your experts looking at the report. They're looking at data. It's being developed. The prosecution gets this information on May 8th. They immediately they do exactly what you're supposed to do. They immediately turn around and give it to the defense. The defense somehow waits another 8 days until the 16th to raise this objection and claim that this should be excluded. And the judge denies this, as she should have. There was no basis to deny this at all. Basically, it's one of those things. I mean, let me just say, it was also rich for the defense to be doing this, given everything that Arca did. But nevertheless, basically, the position of the judge was you can have vigorous cross-examination, much like she gave to the Commonwealth on Arca, but I'm not going to keep this information out, and that is the correct ruling.
I think that's exactly right. This is why you don't sit on things. And by sit on things is you can't just decide to, appeal things or decide to object to things strategically. If this were really a problem, you can't sit on it and decide, oh, well, this is actually really bad for us. And by the way, once this came in, it made total sense, right? Like, I think we had kind of speculated maybe he fumbled around for his phone or something, but it seems clear that it was such an intense impact that everything stopped at that moment. And this now makes a lot of sense. I don't think anything in my house is actually synced right now. All of our clocks are like slightly off. And so it intuitively makes sense, but also this was the correct call to let it in as well.
So the last day of week 4 begins with a joint stipulation that Michael Proctor was not present at the autopsy, which was a claim the defense had mistakenly asserted the day before and led to all sorts of Twitter, whatever. Turns out, no, he wasn't there. And they have a joint stipulation, which is basically both sides disagree. Yes, this is the fact. We're not going to waste the court's time or anybody else's time having to call a witness about this. We're going to stipulate to it. This happens a lot in normal trials. I think it happened here because the defense did not want to highlight the fact that they had gotten this so egregiously wrong the day before. Best way to deal with it, do the stipulation and move on. At this point, the Commonwealth plays a clip with Karen saying that when she found John, he had a splinter of glass in his nose, and she pulled it out, and he gushed blood. This, of course, defeats the defense's argument that some of the wounds to John's face were caused by the vicious fight / dog attack that he was in the night before. Karen, once again, helpfully explaining that no, those wounds were caused by me. Much like all his wounds, this wound was also caused by Karen when she removed this splinter of glass. After this,
so sad. All of this, and I cannot emphasize enough for those of you who have not gotten the point yet. If you're on trial for anything, certainly for murder, everything you say can and will be used against you. But this is just so consistent with, if you're telling a lie or you're trying to create a conspiracy that is not in fact rooted in evidence, it's hard to get away from truth. Right? All the things she's saying, it's impossible to keep your story straight when it's not the truth. And I think we see this very clearly. It just helpfully happens that she's given these interviews publicly and they are for all to see because she was garnering, support for her, I guess, free me sort of campaign.
So after this, Andre Porto testifies. He's a forensic scientist. He does some DNA testing. He might have been with Bodie Labs. I can't remember. Maybe coming later. I'm not sure. Anyways, he does some DNA testing on various items. He finds John's DNA on most of the places you would expect it to be: sweatshirt, sneaker, drinking glass, and his jeans. He does find it in one place that you might not expect it to be, which was the taillight housing from Karen's vehicle. Of course, it could have happened randomly. He's just caressing her taillight. That's possible. Or it could have happened when she hit him with it the night before. So one way or the other, his DNA is on the taillight housing. There are also some unknown profiles on basically all of this, which is also to be expected.
So next is Ashley Valier, who is the forensic scientist tasked with basically putting the jigsaw puzzle that was the taillight together. Now, she also compared the debris that was scraped out of John's shirt to the taillight, and the debris included, I find this incredibly compelling. So it's one thing to have John's DNA in the taillight housing, right? Okay, maybe he was weird and liked to touch her taillight. I don't know. Then how do you explain that in his shirt, there were tiny red shards matching the taillight pieces? The taillight is embedded in his shirt. We're not talking like someone stuck, a big shard of red taillight on his shirt. We're talking microscopically. She had to look through a microscope and she saw basically like microscopic little shavings of red shards that had embedded itself in his shirt, maybe upon a massive impact. I mean, what are we even doing here at this point? This is really like an affront to all rational thinking that we're even arguing about why is his DNA on the taillight. Okay, fine. Move away from his DNA on the taillight. Let's move to his shirt. How did those shards get into the fibers of his shirt?
And later on, as we're going to talk about, the jury saw a picture of this. They actually saw a photograph of, under a microscope, this debris that included these taillight pieces connected, intertwined with fibers from his shirt. I mean, it's just
again, it's not
astonishing.
sprinkled on top, right? It's
astonishing.
If you want to talk about the hair was like somehow placed on the bumper, this is not like shards just like sprinkled on top of the shirt. It's embedded in the fibers of the shirt. I don't know about you, but I get stuff on my shirt all the time. I can brush it off. You don't brush off these shards that are inside. How does that happen? I don't know. Maybe a massive impact where your shirt like gets into the taillight because you've been hit so hard that you are entangled and become one with the taillight. Okay, so next is Nicholas Bradford from Bow Technology. Now, Bradford says that the DNA on the taillight housing was John's. Okay, we're going back and forth. You see what's happening? This is a jigsaw puzzle. We're seeing taillight on John's shirt, John's DNA on taillight. What does that mean, guys? They were together at one point. Neither Buchanan nor Proctor's DNA were on the housing of the taillight. So the conspiracy would be, of course, that the Canton PD or all these people were messing with Karen Reed's taillight, breaking it maybe, pulling off shards of it, and then sprinkling it around. Well, there's no evidence that they've touched it. There's no DNA of him. But do you know whose DNA is on it? On the taillight housing? John. You know why? Because John touched it. Except he didn't touch it. The taillight touched him in a very vicious manner. Now, the hair is either John's or someone on his maternal side. Because this is how DNA works, right? It doesn't say, oh, we have found the DNA of Brett or Alice. It says it is consistent with Brett or someone who's related to Brett because you share DNA with people who you are family with. This is how we find serial killers, you know, with like 23andMe and all those other type of DNA companies. So, okay, let's say it's not John's. It's someone on his mother's side. So how does that help the defense? Because no one on his mother's side that we know of is part of this case here, unless they are also part of the conspiracy, of course.
And you know, just once again, this just goes, if you're going to frame somebody, police officers out there, use the cup of blood, not the single hair that you plucked from the victim. The blood, much easier to connect.
Just splash it. Splash it on the undercarriage of the car. Yeah. Splash it everywhere, in fact.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Just drip it everywhere. It's the icing on the conspiracy cake, right? Okay, next we have Shannon Burgess, who testifies. Now, he was hired to look at Karen Reed's SUV data. This SUV turned on at 12:12 a.m. That's when they left the waterfall bar. And it turned off at 12:42 at John's house. So it continuously was on from the time it left the waterfall until it went to John's house. Now, it powered on again at 5:07 in the morning and didn't power off again until 5:46 a.m., presumably when she made it to Jen McCabe's house. Now, the clock issue was discussed about the clocks being not perfectly matched up. Now, the difference between the SUV's clock and the iPhone clock was somewhere between 21 and 29 seconds. Based on this, if you synchronize those clocks, the backing maneuver that's seen on the SUV ended between 12:32:04 and 12:32:12 a.m. John's last steps registered at 12:32:16. We're talking about microseconds. Microseconds. So whatever the last backing maneuver, if we can't pinpoint it exactly to a point, we're talking about within 10, is that a millisecond? 10 milliseconds. Like 4 milliseconds after that, John's last steps are registered.
And if you, there was this question about whether it's when the backing maneuver ends or begins. And it was never entirely clear. I mean, this is a little confusing to me, at least when I was watching this, about because if it's when it ends, then you have this very small discrepancy. If it's when it begins, you don't even have a discrepancy. I mean, because it would take some period of time, some brief amount of time for the car to move backwards and strike John. So you may actually have, depending on how tight you can get this, absolute synchronicity. Either way, it doesn't matter. I mean, we're talking, like Alice said, we're talking like a small amount of time here, a handful of seconds at most, a few seconds, nothing significant. What you have is her SUV doing this backing maneuver, and then John never moves again. And then next day, his body's found dead in the snow. And he has her taillight embedded in his shirt. And he has his DNA on her taillight housing. and his hair stuck to her bumper, and her crazy text messages, and her saying she hit him, and everything else she did. I mean, this is not tough, not a difficult case here. So in cross-examination, the defense, they can't really go after the data. And this is fairly typical. You can't go after the data, so you have to go after the expert. And they're hammering Burgess on his resume, in particular, his BA degree, whether ever completed this BA degree. Now, his resume, the one that he provided to the court, to the jury, to the defense, to everybody, is accurate. And it indicates that he is working on this BA degree. Like a lot of people, he's been working on this for a long time because it is actually unrelated to his job. It's sort of in the area of computers and everything else, but it's not like he needs it for his job. His expertise is based on his experience, and it's based on his technical certifications. But the defense, and I'm going to go on a limb and say this was definitely part of the sort of Twitter crew, because the defense has the benefit of having like all these people who are constantly looking for stuff. And I'm sure some enterprising person from Twitter went to LinkedIn and looked at this guy's LinkedIn profile. And on his LinkedIn profile, it indicates that he's finished this BA in 2018. So the defense is like, you lied about your BA, essentially wanting to say, if you lied about your BA, then how can we trust anything? How do we know? How can we trust your data, right? Essentially. So he testifies that that was his intended graduation date on LinkedIn, which he has not accessed in years. And when he did, he put it up with his intended date, and he's just never corrected that. And this was the gotcha. This was like hours of cross-examination about this issue with his resume.
And if you read Twitter, because I was following it like online rather than going back and listening to it during the workday, I was like, oh man, it sounds like it's going really bad for this witness. Man, they're really hammering him. Did he lie about even getting a degree at all? And then when I realized it was like something unrelated, that everything provided to the court was accurate, it's almost like if you went to their old MySpace page when they were still in high school, and it's like, you said your favorite color was red back then. Didn't you just say it was blue? Yeah, like 15 years ago, the last time I accessed MySpace. Is that still up? I didn't even know. That's essentially what they're fixating on. LinkedIn wasn't provided to them. LinkedIn is not an official site. It's a public site. Absolutely. The fact that he hasn't accessed it for a very long time, when you like put in your degree, if you hadn't yet gotten it yet and you put in a date, that would make sense that if you didn't access it since then, it would have the wrong date if you ended up changing the date that you finished. And the degree wasn't even related. Like, it didn't even matter. It didn't go to his qualifications here. Anyway, it was meant to be splitting hairs and to try and create doubt. So if you listened only to like the online reporting, it seemed like this was a slam dunk, so bad for the prosecution. Does this expert know anything? What they were crossing him on had nothing to do with actually what he was testifying about. And it does not bring me concern, especially because what he provided to the court, and in this case, was totally accurate.
At one point, who knows? This may be very effective for all I know. The jury may have heard this and thought, wow, we can't trust this guy. At one point, they pull out a resume that he had provided in a prior case that said that his BA degree was going to be completed in 2024. And they were like, oh, so you lied here. You said you got it in 2024. The problem was that case was 2023. So it was the same thing. Like, he's like updating his resume as he goes. He's just never taken like the last classes he needs or whatever, which I'll just point out, all the Twitter geniuses who kept saying he went to the University of Alabama. He didn't go to the University of Alabama. He went to the University of Alabama in Birmingham. UAB is a different school with a different mascot and everything else. So you guys can't read a resume either. Yeah. And it was funny because people kept pulling up the LinkedIn profiles of everybody on the defense. Like Alan Jackson still has him running for like DA or something. I forget what he ran for, but whatever he ran for, Karen's still working at her last job. Because I update my LinkedIn profile. I don't know the last time I updated my LinkedIn profile. It does not say that I'm a podcaster. I'll tell so clearly I don't ever read my Wikipedia page, but my understanding is that for a very long time, my Wikipedia page said that in college I was voted the 71st hottest white guy in Alabama, which is obviously false because it would have been much higher than 71st. What are you talking about? Right? But it said that for like...
Just by the way...
years.
Brett didn't put that there that I'm aware of.
I did not
boy, does he throw it in my face all the time.
I never touched it. But it's like, somebody's gonna be like, isn't it true that your Wikipedia page said this thing? It's not true. It's like, I don't know. It's the Wikipedia page. It's your LinkedIn profile. What's crazy about this is the resume he actually provided on which the jury is going to judge him and his qualifications is perfectly accurate. But we're arguing about, his LinkedIn page and a resume from a trial, 2 years ago or whatever. But the point of this is to muddy the water. And what's interesting about this to me is the psychology of this, because, if you're handicapping this case, you're just covering the case, you might say this was bad for the prosecution because it's an unforced error. And it is. It muddies the water. It makes it more difficult for the jury to see what's important, blah, 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 right? But if you actually care about truth, then this just muddies the water. I mean, the defense just wants to win, right? I mean, that's their job, is to win. So they're trying to muddy the water. But you, as a consumer of this, can see through this. Oh, this is, this doesn't actually relate to the data. So it always surprises me, the people who are willing to allow themselves to be deceived by the deceptive tactic, which is meant to muddy the water. Like, why are you allowing the water to be muddied for you? I never get that. So, I mean, was it a good attack? Absolutely. And they had some other ones. He initially submitted I had this happen to me recently where I sent something to somebody and literally like the second after I sent it, I saw a typo. And so I changed the typo and like sent it. I was like, hey, ignore that. Ignore that one. This is the one you need to use. And it was a fairly important typo. So hopefully they use the second one. But he submitted his report. I think it said megabits instead of megabytes, and he saw that and he changed it to megabytes. And so he immediately uploads the new report, but they're like, you made this error. Okay. Yeah. Which he immediately corrected, but it's an attempt to attack, or, oh, well, if he was sloppy with that, then maybe he's sloppy with something else. But the problem is they never connect it to the data. So to give you a comparison from the first trial, the lady who did the dog bite stuff and testified for the defense that it was a dog bite. On cross-examination, the prosecution attacked her in sort of a similar way, but it connected to the testimony. So she was talking about dog bites and what you look for and all this other stuff. And the prosecution was able to say, well, hey, here's your book or whatever. I forget if it was a book she wrote or a report she wrote in a different case or whatever. And they were like, and you say this, and this is what you look for if you have a dog bite case. Is any of that present here? And she has to say no. And it's like, well, why are you saying one thing in this case and a totally different thing here? And you can see that's a really good attack because you're using their own words against them. You're undermining their testimony. At no point, in my opinion, at no point did they actually say, isn't what you're doing, isn't your analysis or your methodology or this or that, isn't it wrong? Isn't it incorrect? Doesn't it indicate that you don't really know what you're doing? They never were able to do that. It was purely just an attack on him and a hope that the jury would take from that he must be incompetent.
And like you said, because it went on for so long, and you can imagine a juror may get lost in the trees and not see the forest, it's possible it created confusion. So we'll see, what ultimately happens from it.
So we have the defense. They spend the better part of a day on this, and we talk about this for a very long time. They talk a little bit about seconds here and there. Could it be a couple seconds before or a couple seconds after? But I mean, it's really minor stuff. Even if they're right, it doesn't really matter because he's given them a range, right? He hasn't said it's specifically this much time. So yes, it could be a few seconds before, it could be a few seconds after, but it's so minuscule, it's not going to have any large effect. So on redirect, it's crazy because they spent a day on this and it just went on and on and on. And on redirect, the Commonwealth comes back and they clean all this stuff up in a few questions. I mean, they point out once again, the resume he provided the court is completely correct. They talk about LinkedIn. He says he hasn't updated it in years. This gives them an opportunity to just pile on all of his qualifications, all of his certifications, all the work he's done, why he's an expert, all this stuff, which they do. And then they go back and they just talk about the data again. And they go through it one more time, tying the time of the reverse to the time of the last movements of John's phone. So the redirect is really effective, both because it rebuts what the defense is saying, but also because they use it as an opportunity to repeat the testimony, which you always want to do, right? Because that first time it comes out, you're kind of looking over at the jury, did they get it? Do they understand why this is significant? and they get the opportunity to do it again.
Okay, we're closing in on to really, this is a shockingly few number of witnesses for 2 weeks of trial. Next is Christina Hanley. Now, she matched the glass shards to the cocktail glass. 6 pieces fit the glass, and several glass pieces found on the bumper did not match mechanically, but were consistent with that glass. In other words, when you're putting the pieces of the glass back together, she didn't have anywhere for these to fit necessarily. And this isn't surprising given that not all the pieces were collected. It's not like you have the full puzzle pieces, right? So there could be parts that don't necessarily fit there. What matters, and you can imagine if glass is shattered, it's going to be hard to put it back together to have all the pieces to know exactly where they fit. But the fact that the glass itself is consistent with that cocktail glass is, remember, the same cocktail glass that Karen Reed herself said that she didn't drink from, but she and John left with the cocktail glass from the Waterfall bar. Now, Christina Hanley also showed a picture under a microscope of the debris collected from John's sweatshirt, what Brett was talking about earlier. Now, there are tiny pieces of clear and red plastic that you can see. It's not sitting on top of the threads, but it's actually attached to threads from John's clothing. The largest one of these shards was like the size of rice, and the smallest was under 1/16 of an inch. So relatively small shards, not large, shards sprinkled all on top. Kind of not totally visible to the naked eye unless you knew what you were looking for. That's why you had to look microscopically. And this is another point about the conspiracy. If you wanted it to look like John's shirt had been part of this collision, why not make it obvious to the eyeball? Why make it so
Stick a
hard?
shard in there.
Really, stick one tiny shard in there so that maybe they're going to look at it microscopically and see it. It's like the one piece of hair. Like, there are lots of ways to make it kind of obvious. You want someone to look at him and be like, wow, do you see all that red taillight on his shirt? We better collect that shirt for evidence because it sure looks like he was hit by somebody, I mean, this is very, very compelling because of how small it is, and you have to see it under a microscope, and you see it yourself. You see how it's embedded. Like, how does a human being take a tiny, tiny, itsy bitsy 1/16 of an inch tweezer to place these in there? No, that's not what happened. It's because they were they were smashed there when the car smashed into him. Now, finally, there's Dr. Isaac Wolf, the really most qualified expert ever to expert. He's a literal brain surgeon who graduated summa cum laude from one of the best schools you've ever heard of. It's called Yale. Definitely better than Harvard. Sorry.
I thought the outline was edited here.
I don't know what you're talking about. He's a very smart man. Basically, anything he says, you can trust. Those of you who have not followed us, I'm kidding. I'm jabbing Brett, who tells us all the time he went to Harvard. Now, Dr. Wolf confirmed that I feel like with the Karen Reed case, you can't be sarcastic. You have to say things explicitly. Otherwise, people will take it and run with it and join the conspiracy. Anyways, Dr. Wolf confirmed that the injury to the back of John's head was a classic linear basilar skull fracture. And the only way to get this injury was to fall backwards and hit the back of the head with the energy going into the brain and to the base of the skull. Now, this injury was inconsistent with being struck by an object like a hammer or a bat. This is really important. This brain surgeon is saying, while it looks like, because he has bruising on his face, it's like there's, swelling under his eyes. It looks like he has black eyes. It looks like he's been beat up. He's like, no, the way this injury works is not with being struck with something. Rather, it's by falling backwards, and all that energy is going through the skull, causing this type of linear basilar skull fracture. Now, John's black eyes were caused by this impact, not by a beating. And the bleeding on the brain, which causes the eyes to swell with blood, is what's causing this bruising that we now see. They were not caused by trauma to the face. So those black eyes came from the pooling of the blood from the base of the skull, rather than being, say, hit in the face with a punch. Now, Dr. Wolf says it's unclear whether John was unconscious immediately, but it would have happened rather quickly. Although Dr. Wolf says that John did not die immediately, and this is the most devastating part, had John been helped, he could have survived these injuries. But obviously we know now that he wasn't helped, because the person who could have gotten him help drove away and then proceeded to cover up the fact that she had hurt him. Now, for once, the cross-examination is exceedingly brief, probably because this literal brain surgeon has incredibly damning evidence for the defense. Now, Alessi starts by noting that Dr. Wolf is not a pathologist. This ended poorly for Alessi because Dr. Wolf doesn't shy from it. He's like, no, you're right. I'm not a pathologist. I am a brain surgeon who has seen way more brains and brain injuries than a pathologist because my job is to fix brains all day long. So unlike a pathologist who only sees a certain number of brains, I see it day in and day out all the time. So I've actually seen way more brains than a pathologist. So you're right. I'm not a pathologist. I'm more qualified. That was not great for Alessi. Now, the best Alessi can get here is that there's a small little laceration above John's eye that would not have been caused by the impact of his head to the ground. This is not great. Again, this is the straw man thing. He can't explain the base skull fracture to the pooling of the blood that's not from being hit with a bat or any sort of trauma. He can't explain any of these injuries, but he's going to fixate on one tiny little cut on the face. And he's like, ha, see, that cut could not have been from a fall, right? And Dr. Wolf's like, no, you got me there. That one cut, which did not render him unconscious, did not cause his death. That cut, maybe a paper cut. You're right. Okay.
Which this is another place it's helpful that Karen has already pointed out to us that there were other things causing injuries to John's face, like that shard of glass. So there's all sorts of possibilities for how that would have happened. So not great for her once again. And I just got to say, this testimony, it's devastating in a couple different ways. I mean, number one, it demonstrates that Karen leaving him there caused his death, that she could have saved him if she had done the right thing. And I think that's important because I don't think anybody's going to believe that she didn't realize he was there. And remember, with this second-degree murder thing, there's a couple different ways you could get there. You could get there because she was incredibly reckless when she accelerated into the back of him. But maybe you say, well, maybe her foot slipped, or maybe she was drunk, or maybe she didn't mean to do that, or it was in a rage. It wasn't really intentional. Like, whatever argument you want to make. The problem is, it was also incredibly reckless to leave him there, and a massive disregarding of his life and what was necessary. And that's one reason it's important. But there's a more subtle reason I think it's important as well. What has been the conspiracy theory that we've heard for years? This, maybe it wasn't a premeditated murder. There's lots of, I believe the blogger calls it an assassination, but we'll ignore him because he's crazy. Maybe it's just a pre-planned attack. It was an attack that turned into a death, but it was an accident. Well, the problem is you have this doctor who's saying he wasn't beaten. His head hit something. He fell backwards and his head hit something. So what does that mean? You might even say, well, okay, fine, but that doesn't mean it hit the grass. Okay, fine. Let's consider that. What are you left with? He went into that house and there was some sort of accident. He wasn't punched in the face. He wasn't attacked with a bat. He wasn't led downstairs where Colin Albert was waiting on him. Your best case, I guess, is that Chloe jumped on him and he fell backward and hit his head. But what you have to believe after that is that this group of friends who did not attack him, who did not lure him there to attack him, that saw this happen where the dog jumped on him, and you've got the college students who are there celebrating the birthday, and these various people who are all friends of John's decided to cover up this accident where he's not dead, he's just knocked out. But they don't call an ambulance. They don't say, we should get him some help. They say, well, he fell backwards and hit his head, now he's knocked out. The only thing to do, I guess, is to put him in the front yard. And hopefully he'll freeze to death. And maybe we can blame it on Karen Reed later. That's what you have to believe happened here at this point with Dr. Wolf's testimony. And I don't know how any sane person could believe that's what happened if that is the only theory that now fits with the science.
Like, what if he doesn't look beat up, right? Like, the pooling is happening slowly. So it's not like he's gushing blood from the nose or anything like that. Like, what if he wakes up outside and is like, dude, why did y'all put me outside? Were you trying to kill me? Like, that is terrible. That is a terrible, very possible reality, right? Like, if he's like, guys, I just got knocked out. Why did you put me outside? We thought the snow would be good for your bruising. Like, are you kidding me?
If you Googled how long to die in the cold, you're not going to get 15 minutes. It's going to give you, like, it's going to take some amount of time, some significant amount of time. I mean, what if the snowplow comes by and sees him? What if somebody drives past? What if the next door neighbor looks outside as you're lugging his body out to your own front yard to dump him? And somehow doing all that, by the way, with his phone registering no movement. But nevertheless, like, how is this even conceivable for people? I honestly don't know. To me, it is just shocking that we're at this point. But after Dr. Wolf testifies, I think it's after Dr. Wolf testifies, we have another clip. And I do have this one because this one was a little bit louder. And it's a couple of clips of Karen, including her telling you exactly when John died. So let's see if we can play this one.
So we approach from the north. We actually missed the turn. And John says to me, it's Fairview, we just passed it. It's back there. It's on my left. I said, all right. So I pull nose into a driveway and back out onto the street, which I now own was Cedar Crest, and then come from the north onto Fairview.
Like the next play, clip 25.
At 12:41, I leave a voicemail to John where you can clearly, and this will probably be played on Monday, you can clearly hear me pull into John's garage. You can hear my car sensors beeping as I come close to the sides of the garage. And then you hear the car go off, and then you hear the slight ding, ding, ding as I open the door, shut the door. I had high heels on that night. You hear me walk in, go into the stairs up into the kitchen, shut the door. You hear me walk in the kitchen. It's like a full minute long. That's at 12:41.
Which means, by the way, it would have beeped right before she hit John, too. So, accident, I'm sure.
And finally, clip 24.
I do. I mean, I'll tell you, John and I argued the morning of the 28th, Friday morning. So we think he died right around 12:25, 12:30 on the early morning of January 29th.
That is, in fact, when John, he wasn't dead, but when the thing happened to him that killed him was right around 12:30 when Karen Reed backed into him. And it's just, she doesn't mean to tell the truth, but she's constantly telling the truth. Like, if you listen to what she says and you parse it, she tells you everything. As we said last episode, as they were driving up, she was expecting to see him on the side of the road. Why? Because that's where she left him. If he went into that house and was attacked by a dog or beaten by some teenagers or, fell and hit his head on the back of the table and they had decided to put him on the side of the road, why would she be expecting to find him there? But that's what she says. And it's just the whole thing, her statements. And this is one of the biggest differences between this trial and the last trial. Her statements constantly punctuating all this and undermining everything the defense has done. This is if you're going to law school, they should be teaching classes about client management. Do not let your client do this, because she is burying herself with every interview she gave.
Absolutely. We've said this since week 1, but the best witness against Karen Reed has been Karen Reed, and it's been used effectively by the prosecution. There's been no low blows. It's just been perfectly placed the way it is. How do you talk your way out of that defense? You don't, because that is your defendant.
Be great if she testifies. but
she
I don't think
need
she
to.
will.
She already is. Truly,
That's
she already
true.
is.
So that brings us to the end of this week. This was a short week. This actually ended this was like testimony on Wednesday, I think. They took Thursday off. They took Friday off. They took Monday off, which is today as we record this. They'll be back tomorrow. I will say this. I think the prosecution's pretty close. Unless there's some very extensive defense cross-examination, I think they're done by the end of the week, maybe earlier. I think we're going to see a few more experts. We're going to see this accident recreationist, that kind of thing. We'll see a few more clips from Karen. And then I think they'll rest, and we'll have to see what the defense does. Presumably, they'll call ARCA, who is even more in the bag for them now than they were before, and probably has come up with all sorts of new canons that will be supportive of their position. I assume Lucky will testify based on questions that were presented to Yuri. So Lucky will testify about all the things he saw and all the things he didn't see, like the basketball goal he ran into that night. But he's their star witness who's going to explain that John wasn't where Karen expected to find him, at least when he was going by. So I don't know if they'll call Michael Proctor or not. very dangerous to start calling prosecution witnesses as a defense attorney, but maybe they'll try. We'll just have to see what happens, but I would expect maybe by the time we do the next recap, the trial will be over.
One can only hope, right?
One can only hope. I do want to mention our Substack. If you guys haven't been following it, we released an article today. We're doing this whole thing, Prosecutors University thing, which you think if you're like a law student or somebody who's really interested in the law, you'll probably really enjoy it. The rest of you may as well. I mean, this is Legal Briefs, so presumably you like this stuff. But we're doing these articles on particular areas of law. So I think we've done one on sentencing. We did one on opening arguments and closing arguments, or opening statements and closing arguments, and how they're different. The one today was on habeas, which also involves the Karen Reed case because she used habeas in an attempt to prevent her retrial. It failed, obviously. So if you want to learn sort of in-depth about some of these legal concepts, check out the Substack, check out Prosecutors University. I think you will enjoy it. And the Substack, by the way, will include a link in the show notes, but it is the True Crime Times. So check it out. Look it up on Substack. You'll find it. Google is your friend. And let us know what you think. That's all I got.
I don't even know what to say. I can't believe we're covering so much of this, but there's not much to cover. So we'll see where this takes us. This has been a trip. I'm not going to say that I love it, Brett. I'm really glad that you're on paternity leave right now and can watch this.
I know.
I still have like a full-time job. So I have not been watching it all day, every day. But I hope these are helpful so that you don't have to watch it all day, every day. But if you want to, you can always join us on our live stream. I guess that's what it's called. Live stream of it. You can chat with each other and we'll pop in and out. Brett, I don't know that there's more to say, but maybe we can answer a question or two. So if people have something that's not Karen.
Why not?
Why not? Even though this has gone on for more than an hour.
I remember when legal briefs were going to be brief. But
we are covering 2 trials, so we can say this is each 45 minutes.
There you
40
go. That's
minutes.
a good point. That's a good point.
This was 2 weeks worth.
If we were wise,
We're saving you.
we would split this into 2 episodes. But
that's right.
We're not wise. We're terrible and all this stuff. So, okay, let's see. Legal briefs questions. Once again, if you leave a 5-star review and you leave a question, we will answer it. And legal briefs questions are more rare than prosecutors podcast questions, so you will move up in the queue. Okay. This is a good one. This is a tough one.
Uh-oh, can't wait.
This is a tough one. I feel like I need more time to think about this, but okay. Joe M20 wants to know, who is your favorite Supreme Court justice, past or present, as an opinion writer? And what is your favorite SCOTUS opinion? Whew, that one's tough.
That's a loaded question, because there are some good writers. There's some great writers.
There were some great writers who were terrible justices.
Exactly, that I don't agree with.
Like,
and there
Oliver Wendell Holmes could write a great opinion doing a terrible thing. So he was a great writer. Scalia wrote amazing. Scalia's dissents were incredible.
I would
Scalia's
laugh
dissents
out loud
were better
at
than
Scalia's
most opinions.
Especially when he was like unleashed on a concurrence or a dissent because he didn't have to have anyone else sign on to it. Like his footnotes would make me spit out coffee laughing. Like that's good writing.
Definite read the footnotes guy.
Definitely read the footnotes.
It wasn't his dissent in Lemon, but he was talking. It was another religion case. There was this thing called the Lemon test, which was
horrible.
When it was so confusing. I mean, it was
horrible
impossible.
Because it created no clarity. It was one of those like, here's a 5-step test of how to determine nothing. You couldn't.
When I was in law school and we did the moot court competition, it was a Lemon question that we had to do, and it was awful. It was so bad. But the Lemon test, you apply it to sort of separation of church and state stuff. But people hated it. And so the Supreme Court, they issue Lemon in this like 10-prong test you're supposed to apply. Nobody can figure it out. And so the Supreme Court, they keep issuing new opinions that don't mention Lemon, but then every now and then it gets mentioned again. And so in one of them, it gets mentioned, and Scalia writes his dissent is like, this is because I like horror, but it was like the Lemon test, like some ghoul in a late night horror movie rises from its grave to shuffle about, terrifying, anyone trying to understand our Establishment Clause jurisprudence, something like that. It was much better written than that, but it was like stuff like that. I think my favorite, I really liked Justice Jackson. This is a cliched answer because everybody says this, but I really liked it. His concurrence in the Youngstown Steel case, which it was a concurrence, but it's like the controlling, the majority wrote something, but nobody cares what they wrote. But he writes this thing that's all about executive power and when it's at its strongest and when it's at its weakest. And it's just beautifully written. He was he was a great justice. He would have been Chief Justice, but he went and did the Nuremberg trials instead. He was the American judge, prosecutor. Was he the prosecutor for the Americans? Maybe he was the prosecutor. He represented the United States in the Nuremberg trials. And so he ended up not being chief because of that. But he knew that when he went over there, and he felt like it was important enough to miss that, which he was right about.
Which he was right?
But he was great. That's a great opinion. And really, so important because it really lays out. Because as we talked about before, the executive power, it's so vast in so many ways. And he talks about that. Basically, if Congress hasn't acted and if it's something that's traditionally in the executive's realm, the executive's power is basically unlimited. They can do anything. And then it's like, if Congress could legislate but hasn't, the executive has more power, but it's still limited. It's sort of in this gray area. And then if Congress has legislated, then the executive's power is at its weakest, it's the lowest, which makes sense. And it's this whole balance of power, separation
of powers. It's the spectrum of powers. And it's so interesting because obviously we've talked about how we have a common law system, and like the Constitution is not a rule book, right? It does not contemplate every situation ever. And so those opinions are so helpful because it helps us, it illuminates the thinking behind how you look at all these problems, because we have to apply these cases for future types of cases. That really was brilliant.
Yeah. And really, it has to be a 20th century forward because the writing was so stilted before then. There are great opinions from like 1940, but God, they're hard to read. It's just, this is difficult. They gotten better and better. But now, the one problem I'll say now that you see is everybody now wants to be Scalia, right? Like everybody wants to be Scalia, including circuit court judges. And so they're always writing this flowery, they're trying to capture that genius, and they never do.
And his genius was that he was not trying to be flowery for flowery purposes. He was just such a good writer that his analogies and his descriptors so perfectly captured what he was trying to say, right? He wasn't doing it for a flourish. If you've met him, he's not a man of flourish, right? He's actually a very staid kind of person, but his language was what captured in fewer words so succinctly something that immediately, as soon as you said it, you could almost smell it. You could feel with your senses what he was trying to describe, which is really a gift within the law. But now you do have judges who drop like 500-page opinions, and 485 of those pages probably were unnecessary. Not always the case, but I do think it's an art that cannot be replicated in the way that some think.
There's one judge, I'm not going to mention the name, but
I'm thinking of a lot of judges.
Someone that I may or may not have to practice in front of often. And every time an opinion comes out and this judge wrote it, I'm just like, oh God, because I know.
It's going to be 4 times longer than it needs to be.
Yeah. And it's going to have some ridiculous analogy, or it's going to start with some sort of strained Shakespeare quote with a footnote.
We might have to stop while we're still ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, I just like, kill me. Anyway.
I will say this, with all the flowery language, I'll end on a positive note. So one of the judges I clerked for is a district court judge, so the trial level judge. He truly was he won like every writing award. At Oxford, he was a Rhodes Scholar. At Yale, where he went to law school. At Harvard, where he went to undergrad. Like, he truly won every award that there could ever be at any of these institutions. And he was the most beautiful writer that I've ever had the privilege of working with. And he was my first real law mentor, because I clerked for him first and then clerked on the circuit court afterwards. But you work really closely with the judge. And I remember the first thing I ever wrote for him, and he was so smart, so kind. And he just like gave me back, and it was you write like an opinion that's supposed to be the judge's words, and it came back just like dripping in red ink. Like, it was so demoralizing to look at this, like, I don't know, 15-page opinion. And basically it was like, this is horrible. Try again. Except he did not say that. He said it so kindly. And his writing in real life of someone I've worked with is the closest to the writing that we were praising Scalia for, where his ability to capture something that is almost elusive of the common senses that we all use was there. And so when I left that clerkship, because you work for the judge for 1 year, I printed out, like, he would give these beautiful speeches at every event. Like, I got engaged. He gave like a toast and he wrote everything out. Everything was planned, but he would give these speeches as if off the cuff, but truly he put so much effort into them. And so I had him send me all the speeches he gave, when I got sworn into the bar, at my engagement, he gave a toast, at my wedding, all these things. And I had them all printed out and framed. And I still have them to this day. This is a practice that he did. He would print out letters from litigants and criminal defendants who had appeared before him and the impact that he'd had on their lives. And he would have them all over his judge chambers. So I kind of copied what he did. But those words have come with me to every single office I've ever worked in decades later. And so I believe in the power of words. I cannot claim to be as good of a writer as him, but I cannot believe that he was my first mentor. A judge none of you probably know, but he's still a sitting judge. One of the most incredible writers that I've had the opportunity to work with. And when I'm having a bad day, I go back and read his beautiful words that seem to transcend, the boring practice of law at times, and he's able to capture it with such excitement. So I'll end with a real positive.
Yeah, and I want to jump on something you said, because I think it's important, and I think particularly if we have young lawyers, have law students, college students, or old lawyers. I mean, this can apply to anybody. Number one, people often say they're bad writers. That is not accurate. You're not a bad writer. You just don't have enough experience doing it. Writing is one of those things that you can always improve on. And that is an important thing to know, because of the flip side of that, which is no one is born a great writer. I mean, maybe some people are, right? I mean, maybe Shakespeare came out of the womb writing sonnets, right? That's
Nobody
possible.
Was born speaking. Let's put it that way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Language is learned.
And if you want to be, and this is important because we all, or not, maybe not all of us do, but I think a lot of us really want to be great writers. And it can be so devastating for people when they write something they think is really good. And what happened to Alice happens, where you get that draft back. And what you thought was brilliant, was like Scalia-esque, is ripped to shreds. And I think you can either go one of two ways with that. And way too many people are like, oh, I'm a terrible writer. I'm never going to be able to do this. Oh, I can't believe this, right? But if you can handle that kind of criticism and learn from it, that's how you become a great writer. You cannot become a great writer without having someone tear your writing apart. I believe that 100%. I don't think it's possible. I think writing, it's like steel. It has to be sharpened, right? And the sharpening of steel, there are a lot of sparks and there's a lot of violence and friction. And that has to happen for you to become a great writer. And so what Alice's judge did for her, not only did he say great things about her, and they're all true, but he also was willing to give her, to take the time, because it takes time too, because it's really easy to just be like, whatever, right? To take the time to do that, I mean, is a real gift. And I hope that those of you out there who are just starting out, or like I said, maybe you've been doing it for a while, will accept that gift of criticism, because writing is one place where you absolutely need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second thing, you can't get better without someone basically taking you along with what they learned. The second thing, though, I think is something that's lost on a lot of today's society, is you have to read. You have to read opinions. You have to read books. You have to read literature that is brilliant and pulls you out of your typical working. It's not going to come from ChatGPT. I'm sorry. AI can only regurgitate what is existing. But the creativity that comes, it is truly an art form to be able to write at those levels. And I think you're not going to get it from reading great texts or great Twitter, posts. You're not going to get that. You truly need to sit down with like paper in hand, a book in hand with a binding, because I don't think it's the same when you read. And I also read on a Kindle, but it is not the same. I think you need to be like smelling the paper, feeling the pages between your fingers, tabbing through it, going back and forth between pages, putting your finger in between, the connections that you're making, and going back and kind of reliving different parts. If you can do that, if you can read a book, a year, you're ahead of like so many people. But I do actually think you need to read a variety of texts in order to be good. Some of you have asked about good books. The very practical book that like every lawyer basically has is the Brian Garner legal writing book. Scalia wrote with him as well. There's a few of them, but that's like, if you're in law school, they'll direct you to it. It's actually for like a grammar, how to write book. It's beautifully written. It's entertaining. It reads like a story, but it really is like a how-to text of how to write well. And it's specifically for lawyers, but legal writing is supposed to be accessible to everyone. So
Great question.
You got
Great
more
question.
than you bargained for.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Wow, this has been awesome, guys. Thanks for staying with us for our very brief hour-and-a-half episode today. And as always, we love hearing from you. Email us at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. You can reach us on social media as well. And let us know what you think about the Karen Reed trial, or don't. Tell us what else you want to listen to once this trial is over. We'd love to cover it. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I could do it in here.
Why wouldn't you do it in here?
That's a good point. Because I don't want Nancy to see me in a closet, but that's a good point.
I don't think it matters. She's judging you by your recording space.
I forgot. Yeah.
We're interviewing her. She's not interviewing us.
She's not interviewing us. No, not at all. Not at all. Oh my goodness.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, guys. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Pluto TV has all the shows and movies you love streaming for free. That means laughter is free with gut-busting comedies like The Neighborhood, Boomerang, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Bueller.
Mystery is free with countless cases to crack from Criminal Minds, Tracker, and Matlock.
I'm a lawyer, like the old TV show.
And thrills are free with heart-pumping hits like The Walking Dead and Pulp Fiction.
Correctamundo.
Feel the free Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.